the city of St. Louis, you're listening to the Don't Push Pause podcast with your hosts, Justin Johnson and Lindsay Reber.
Welcome to the podcast.
Welcome back, Justin. Happy 2024. Welcome back, everybody.
Yeah, it's been a little while, but we had a nice break, and we are back with some new episodes for 2024. We like to do themes around here, even though Valentine's Day is not really I think a holiday that either of us really celebrate that much, but seemed like a perfect pick for this particular month, doing the Before Trilogy, which I think altogether is like a really different and interesting take on a romance type movie. I don't know if I would categorize it as rom-com, but it definitely has all the hints of like a quote unquote romance type movie. There's a lot of talk about love and relationships and, you know, spending time together and how things are serendipitous.
And the movies, of course, that we're talking about are Before Sunrise, Before Sunset, and Before Midnight, all directed by Richard Linklater, co-written by him, as well as the stars of the film, too. I can't wait to get into this. It had been a long time since I had watched all of these, especially in succession. They're really different when you watch them independently of each other, and the feeling that you're left with the characters and the overall feel of the movie. When you watch them independently of each other versus one right after the other, and I did that last night, and man, what a trip. And it's not that long of a trip, actually, like 4.5, 5 hours, not too bad.
And I think these are interesting movies to talk about, especially in present day, because every day I'm reminded of something I did a decade ago on Facebook, you know, and so it's just like, and I, you know, you look at those photos and you're like, who is that person? You know, what was I thinking? And I was like, you know, I can look at a photo from 10 years ago and think like, oh man, that's awesome. You're probably having the best time. And for all I know, that day I was like, this is just the worst day ever. So time is very strange in how we reflect on it and how we, again, like romanticize certain aspects of our life. And I think that's a lot of what this movie talks about and what the characters are trying to tap into.
And when starting out with Before Sunrise, it was never planned to be something that would be sequelized ever. So I think knowing that going into it and thinking about how it was built upon afterwards, it kind of turns into this whole other animal. The overall feel for me with every one of these movies is living in the moment, which is something that's really hard to do, especially in 2024 with technology and just where we are as a society. And I think it was an interview with Ethan Hawke where he said his daughter watched these movies with her friends, and they were envious of a time when you weren't connected to a phone, you weren't connected to email, and it really, like, you were able to just like be present with somebody else and be able to connect with someone like that. And it makes, you know, you were saying like this idea of romanticizing a connection with someone. Back then, like in 1994 or 95, like you really could make the decision to be like, we're going to just hang out for like this entire day and like see what happens.
Oh, there's still people I think about, you know, like when I would do like a summer camp and then like I can picture their face, but I can't picture their name. And you just think that, you know, in modern times, you'd immediately after you met someone, you'd be like, oh, I'll friend you later on Facebook. And there's no mystery. There's no like, you know, wondering like, oh, will I ever cross paths with this person again? And so these movies are really interesting in the sense that they started in a time pre-social media and being able to find people so easily. And then, you know, the last one took place as early as like just a little under a decade ago. And so it's interesting just seeing those characters in that world, but at the same time, I like it because Linklater doesn't focus on that. You know, he doesn't make that a part of the story. It's ever present in the movies, but they're not really commenting on that, which I do like because it makes it more natural, not so much like hey, we're doing a nostalgia piece or something like that, which I have constantly appreciated Linklater not falling into, even though his movies do seem to live in that pocket. with Days of Confused or Everybody Wants Some, like he seems to make movies that people find nostalgia in, but he doesn't seem like he's doing it in a cheesy way or a forced way. And even when he does these projects that sometimes lean in a more experimental way, he doesn't come off as pretentious. He just seems like a very open-minded, creative filmmaker who's willing to take chances. And I would say 70% of the time he knocks these out of the park. He's had a couple movies that, didn't work as well, but like most of these movies feel like very natural and very of the moment and very creative and have a lot of heart and don't feel trite in any way.
And we'll get into the story where this idea of Before Sunrise came from. And I think when you hear that story, you'll even more so think Linklater wasn't like setting out to do something that was cerebral in a way. It was really like based on an experience that he had, which even grounds the film even more in reality, even though it feels magical at times.
Yeah.
Before Sunrise, I should say, feels magical at times.
And Linklater's interesting because he's this if you listen to any interview with him or watch anything about him, he's this very laid back soul who seems to work in a very slow, relaxed way of like thinking and like, here, I'm going to do this project and I'm going to do something that's interesting to me. But at the same time is like so prolific. I mean, he's made so many films compared to other filmmakers. And granted, a lot of movies he makes are able to be done on a low budget and shot very quickly, but he never really seems to be sitting around like pondering what he's going to do next. It's like something fascinates him and he's like, okay, let's go do this thing. And we'll talk about that with these movies because it seems like the last two came about in that very same way of like, hey, wouldn't it be interesting if we did this? And instead of really thinking about it for too long, they were like, let's just go for it and see what happens, and ended up making one of the best trilogies of all time.
And we'll talk about the themes that start out in Before Sunrise and the ones that continue throughout the series, how they evolve, how the characters evolve. I think the evolution of these characters is probably the most important thing to me. Their relationship, the conflicts that happen. And there's so many films where, we're talking here and you'll be like, it just, it felt so real. The dialogue felt so real, but like it really does. And that's one of the greatest things about this series is that it feels like a camera is really just following Ethan Hawke and Julie Delpy. But it was completely scripted. Everything's very scripted in this film, but it doesn't feel like that. And for me, and I don't know anybody else out there who's had a similar experience that is either one or all of these films, if you have had an experience like that, this is really going to like hit you in the gut. And if you haven't, it's going to feel like this is something that's accessible that could happen.
We'll talk about Linklater's style a little bit too, and how he really does have this ability to make this type of film that I think in the wrong hands would just be a total snooze fest.
Yes,
and he somehow
100%.
manages to not make it feel like we're trying to make a documentary type thing or we're trying to do an experiment. It feels, we keep going back to the word natural, but it feels like these characters are living, breathing, and Linklater turned on a camera, but it didn't happen that way. I mean, he's very methodical at times in the way he wants the characters to live in the moment and the way they're scripted and the style in which it's shot, but it doesn't feel cold. It doesn't feel mechanical. It just feels like we're watching these characters almost in a voyeuristic way at times. And these characters interesting enough in that we'll talk about the actors and their contributions to the script and developing these characters over time, because there's so much going on over the course of these three films that the characters deal with and their love and hate for each other.
So this episode really is going to follow kind of the same vibe of the trilogy. Like we're just going to kind of flow through it in a very easy way. Since
we're covering three films, it would just be too long. I think it made sense to not do a pick of the week, not do a Murray moment. Let's just talk about these three films, and I'll kind of slip in some clips here and there. But this might be a little more freeform than we normally do. But I think it works for these particular movies that we're talking about.
And I apologize in advance if my voice starts cutting out. I'm getting over a little bit of a touch of the flu, so I might start sounding like Kathleen Turner's cousin right now.
Yeah.
I wish. God.
I hate that it's 2024 and you still have to preface everything via text with it's not COVID.
It's not COVID.
I'm just not feeling well. I'm like, all right, we can do this episode.
Yeah.
I'm glad we didn't have to push it a little bit.
I didn't want to do this in a mask. That would have been terrible.
Yeah.
Ugh.
Well, Lindsay, before we get into a clip here, and I'm going to pick one. Well, I'll try to do the clips in order of the movies that came out. But before we get into it, do you want to set up just a brief summary of just what all three of these movies combine, kind of this universe that we're living in with these characters?
I'll do my best. How to summarize an 18-year love story? Well, it begins with Before Sunrise, a story about a chance encounter of two strangers on a train from Budapest to Vienna. Seizing the opportunity for true human connection, Jesse and Celine decide to disembark from the train and spend half a day through the evening until the early morning together in Vienna until the sun rises, when they're forced to part ways, returning to their normal lives. And what felt like a true cosmic connection like they both never experienced, sharing life experiences, philosophies about anything that came to mind, and a genuine attraction to each other's nature. It was unsure if Celine or Jesse would ever see each other again. Until the second installment, Before Sunset, where Jesse finds himself in Paris 9 years later on a book tour for his novel about his life-changing experience with Celine that one night. And as Celine is a resident of Paris and happened to see a flyer for Jesse's event, the reconnection was inevitable. But with only just 80 minutes left before needing to board his plane, Jesse and Celine have only a short time to cram in the 9 years of what they've missed, how they've changed, be reminded of their feelings for each other, though not much help is needed there, as both have been forever changed by their previous one night together. But their lives are so different now. Are they ever going to see each other after this encounter? And flash forward 9 years later, and before midnight, and we find Celine and Jesse are now a full-fledged couple since the end of Before Sunset. With twin girls in tow, the couple's vacationing in Greece on a writer's retreat, traversing the stressors of being in a long-term relationship, parenting, the future, insecurities, and everything in between. Though the couple still connects as much as they ever have, know each other better than anyone else. Do they still love each other? Are they still in this love affair together? This 18-year love story can feel like a familiar journey for some, a complete idolization to others, or a magical, honest portrayal of a relationship. Any way you slice it, the Before trilogy is unlike any other sequelized story out there, and if you're open to it, is going to linger in your heart just as much as the love shared between Celine and Jesse.
That was a really good way to wrap up 2 decades worth of characters.
There's so much cutting out there, but that's, trying to link all of them together.
Well, we'll talk about it more when we come back. Let's go to a clip for Before Sunrise and see how these characters first meet.
So how do you speak such good English?
I went to school for a summer in Los Angeles.
Yeah?
It's fine here?
Yeah, that's good.
I spent some time in London.
Wow.
How do you speak such good English?
Me? I'm American.
You're American?
Yeah.
Are you sure?
Yeah.
No, I'm joking. I knew you were American. And of course you don't speak any other language, right?
Yeah, I get it. So I'm the crude, dumb, vulgar American who doesn't speak any other languages, who has no culture, right? But I tried. I took French for 4 years in high school. When I first got to Paris, I stood in line at the metro station. I was practicing. Un billet, s'il vous plaît. Un billet, s'il vous plaît,
Un
you know?
billet.
Un billet, s'il vous plaît. Un billet, s'il vous plaît, you know? And I get up there, and I look at this woman, and my mind goes completely blank, and I start saying, listen, I need a ticket to get to, So, anyway. So where are you headed?
Well, back to Paris. My classes start next week.
You're still in school? Where do you go?
Yeah, La Sorbonne, you know?
Sure. Are you coming from Budapest?
Yeah, I was visiting my grandmother.
How's she?
She's okay.
She's all right?
She's fine, yeah. How about you? Where are you going?
I'm going to Vienna.
Vienna? What's there?
I have no idea. I'm flying out of there tomorrow.
Huh. You're on holiday?
I don't really know what I'm on. You know?
Okay.
I'm just traveling around. I've been riding the trains for the past 2-3 weeks.
Mm-hmm. You were visiting friends or just on your own?
Yeah, I had a friend in Madrid, but
Madrid, that's nice.
Yeah, I got one of those Euro passes. Is what I did.
That's great. has this trip around Europe been good for you?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, it's been, it sucked, you know?
What?
No, it hasn't. It's had its, well, I'll tell you, sitting, for weeks on end looking out the window has actually been kind of great.
So we've done a Linklater film before, Days of Confused, and I didn't look back on that episode to see how much we went into Linklater's backstory. I'm guessing we probably did a little bit, so I won't regurgitate too much of that here, but just to refamiliarize everyone with Richard Linklater. He is a Texas filmmaker. He's remained in Texas. He grew up in Huntsville and was played baseball. He doesn't really seem like your typical film person. Was like an athlete, very popular, wasn't dark and brooding, really well read. And instead of going to New York or Los Angeles, he was interested in film, but he went to Austin, Texas in his 20s. And Austin, Texas was a different place. I mean, if you've been there recently, it was a different place in the 80s. It was like a very sleepy town. There was an art scene, but it was like you could afford to live there. A lot of people lived there were in their 20s. There was a thriving art scene. And so Linklater kind of worked his way into being one of those first breakout filmmakers. I mean, there were filmmakers in the 70s in Austin that kind of made a name for themselves, like Tobe Hooper and Eagle Pennell. But Linklater was like the next generation of that. And in the late 80s, he started working on a movie called Slacker, which if you haven't seen, it's really worth a watch. It's one of those movies, I think, that in the early 90s changed the way you thought how a film could be made, in the same way Jim Jarmusch did with Stranger Than Paradise. Slacker didn't focus on one particular character or plot. It kind of floated around the city of Austin and went from one person to the next. Very segmented, but not like short story wise. There even really wasn't a story or based around each character. They were just kind of like what was happening that day in Austin. And it's a funny, experimental, unique movie made for like very, very little money on 16 millimeter. But that movie Slacker became Linklater's calling card and was able to get him interviews with producers and to get funding for his next movie that most people are familiar with. That's become kind of a cult classic, and that's Days of Confused, which again was all shot in Austin or in Texas and used a lot of local crew, and Linklater maintaining his roots and staying in Texas even though he was getting bigger budgets. I mean, he's gone and shot elsewhere and shot the Before trilogy elsewhere, but a lot of times his return to Texas to shoot his movies or edit them there and stays there. And if you listen to our episode on Days of Confused, we really couldn't find Linklater saying very many positive things about the experience of shooting that movie, other than him gaining experience working with a studio and working with more seasoned actors. He really felt pretty defeated by producers coming down on him and saying he couldn't do certain things and not letting him do things the way he wanted, and also not trusting him as an artist or a filmmaker because he had only made one low budget movie that a lot of people didn't even really deem a movie. And so he really struggled, but the success of Days Confused allowed him some leverage in Hollywood and amongst young actors who saw Days Confused and gravitated toward it and said, that's a filmmaker that I want to work with. And I think that has really been Linklater's draw for his entire career. Is like actors want to work with him, even actors that are, really well known and normally get paid big bucks. They will do a smaller film if Linklater's a director, and he's worked with so many amazing actors throughout his career. And has continued to do like small movies, and then he'll do a big budget movie. We're not talking like Scorsese big, but within the Hollywood systems, he's continued to go back to studios. But early in his career, it was like a bit shaky. He's coming off of Days of Confused. He's feeling very disillusioned with, I don't want to move to LA. I want to make movies, but I don't want to deal with this Hollywood system again, and having someone tell me every single day, like, what you're doing is wrong and you need to cut things from your script. And so there was a year went by or so before he decided that he wanted to make another movie, and the opportunity to make Before Sunrise started becoming more of a reality to him.
And though Linklater had the opportunity now to do Slacker and Dazed and Confused, Before Sunrise, the idea for this, the genesis behind it, started a good 4 or 5 years before, when he was first kind of promoting Slacker. I think he had just gotten back from New York and he was in Philadelphia, about ready to head back to Austin. And as the story goes, he was with a friend at a toy store waiting for his friend to check out, and he notices this clerk at the toy store. Her name was Amy Lairhupt, and was just kind of, taken with her. And so he kind of slipped her a note, and it said something like, "Hey, I'm in town for one night if you want to hang out." And she slips him a note back that says, "I'll be off at 10. And with that, they spent the entire night together walking around Philadelphia. And thus was born kind of this idea that was behind Before Sunrise. And Linklater really felt like this was a moment of genuine connection that he had with someone, something that was a moment that was just so beautiful that he hadn't experienced with anyone, and something that, it dawned on him, you don't really have these moments of true connection with someone. And he realized it in the moment of hanging out with her that, like, man, this would make an amazing story. Just this idea of a first encounter with someone, this flirtation and kind of back and forth and just kind of vibing off of each other, and then having to part ways. And I think a lot of people can identify with that rush of meeting somebody new that's unexpected, and you are inspired. And Linklater certainly was. So he kind of always had this story in the back of his head that if it was going to be something that he was going to make, it needed to be minimal and really focused on the interaction between these two people. He started thinking more about this story later on when he was in Europe. He started thinking about Amy and how they had lost touch. And though they stayed in contact and exchanged letters for a little while, their connection eventually kind of just faded out and they lost contact. Linklater said he always hoped that he would run into her one of these days or somehow make some type of reconnection. And he has said that making Before Sunrise was kind of, not that he thought getting this movie out there was going to have her running back to his arms or something, but he thought, hey, maybe she will see this and maybe we will make some type of reconnection.
And in starting the process to write the script for Before Sunrise, Linklater wanted to have a woman's perspective on the script, and since it was equal parts dialogue of male and female, he chose to work with one of his friends, Krizan, who had a small part in Slacker. She also had a small role in Days of Confused, a really funny role that she wrote her dialogue for. She's a teacher telling them what Independence Day truly is all about and how they should think about it before they take off for the holiday.
Hey guys, one more thing. Hey, this summer, when you're being inundated with all this American bicentennial 4th of July brouhaha, don't forget what you're celebrating, and that's the fact that a bunch of slave-owning, aristocratic white males didn't want to pay their taxes.
And so her and Linklater got together. She had never written a script before, but had come from somewhat of a writing background, was excited for the challenge. So they got together in Austin, started working on the script for Before Sunrise and developing the story, developing the characters, and working in the scenario, which Linklater had spent with this woman in Philadelphia, how they'd spent the evening together, and sort of having that be a shell of the movie, but then really intricately building who these characters are, why they were traveling, where they were in their lives, but having that come out in natural conversation.
And I think it was Kim's idea, even though Linklater was known to like travel on trains in Europe, from Philadelphia to Austin and around the United States. I think it was Kim's idea to have this set on a train, and she thought that with Linklater's tendency to lean towards stories that happen in one day, that meeting on a train would be perfect for that. And she herself remembers so many interactions with people that she had on trains and, never saw them again. It's totally true. It is like a great setup for the first meeting of people.
And I do love the beginning of Before Sunrise, because we see a similar shot that Linklater had used in Slacker, where someone's watching the world go by, as a passenger, and then the movie kind of opens up and that character starts saying, why they are there, why they're existing, why they went on this trip, why they're a passenger. I think it is something that is really easy to dismiss in our everyday lives. People are constantly traveling. I've been on plenty of trains, and I've never really considered like why anybody is where they're going, what their story is, because a lot of times, you get on a plane or a train and what you want to do is like get headphones on and just kind of like try to suffer through this. But maybe that's American travel, like it seems to be a lot more luxurious traveling in other countries on trains.
You never make up stories about people in your head or like with somebody that you're with? Really?
Maybe if I'm getting really bored, but usually I just try to put on headphones and block everything out until I get to my destination so I can get out of my I'm a tall person too, so I'm usually cramped at wherever transportation I'm in. I don't have a lot of leg room, and I'm just counting my moments before I can stretch my legs.
I guess
that doesn't make for a very interesting movie.
Okay.
Just a cramped guy with headphones on.
No. I guess I'm usually the person who's looking out the window or daydreaming. If I'm by myself, I'm totally making up a story about someone in my head. Or if I'm with somebody else, maybe I'm just the annoying companion that's like, hey, look at that guy over there.
But there is something, I like how this movie is presented in the way of like Ethan Hawke is an American traveler and he's in another country. That's established immediately in the movie. It's interesting in the way of like, he's in his 20s. He can be whoever he wants to be. He's only going to be here for a short amount of time. And I think we all have those tiny little fantasies of like, you go somewhere for a day and no one knows you. And you don't have to be entirely yourself, and naturally, you're going to act differently when you're out of your house and you're in a place you've never been before. Your senses are different and what you're focusing on is different. And I think a lot of that goes into this movie, these little idiosyncratic things of like these characters dealing with the time that they have, and then this excitement of like meeting somebody new, having there be somewhat of an immediate attraction to each other, and then wanting to kill the time by having a good conversation. But then when that time is up, it's like, oh man, I don't want this to end. And now there's the dilemma of like, which character is going to have the gall to say, hey, do you want to keep on talking? Or just, write it off as being like, oh, we were just two people having a quick conversation, but then being faced forever with that. Well, what if I would have asked for this person's number? Or what if I would have done this? There's a lot of these. It's a real big what if movie, and it's addressed immediately with Ethan Hawke saying like, hey, I got to get off, but I'd love it if you got off this train with me and hung out with me for this evening because I can't afford to stay at a hotel, so I'm just gonna like walk around Vienna all evening.
Which seems like a leap, I think, to some people. But Linklater brings up a really good idea and kind of explanation in that when you are traveling, especially for an American abroad, you are more likely to kind of throw caution to the wind. And it doesn't seem like Celine is too put off by even being asked by it. And she's familiar with the train system. And it's a very, like, the Eurorail is used very commonly. So the idea of getting off and then if it doesn't work out, getting just back on, 20 minutes later doesn't seem like a big deal. So I really do buy into this idea of if someone asked me and we were having this magical moment and I had 24 hours to kill or 12 hours to kill, I could totally see how this would really happen.
And I love this meetup, and I love Ethan Hawke's character in the sense of how it's created, not via stereotypes, not the ugly American. I mean, they kind of address that a little bit in the movie, but, because he can only speak English. But
she makes fun of him a lot for being American.
She makes fun of him a lot, but I do like the idea that it is plausible. I buy Ethan Hawke's character as being interesting enough to charm this woman who seems much more worldly than him,
totally,
much more mature than he is. But at the same time, he's not devoid of these American stereotypes of like, he's very aggressive, upfront about being like a horn dog.
Aggressive, not in a mean way.
Not in a mean way, yeah. But like kind of just very
forward
and forceful with like his opinions, which
yes.
Which when you watch the movie now, his character is a little bit grating at times. And there's a moment where there's a street poet and he's being so blatantly cynical about the street poet.
And the fortune teller.
Like, oh, they're just trying to make a buck. And she is a little more open to it. And she's aware of these, she's not denying what he's saying, but this is something that happens in another country, and this is unfamiliar to him in America. You don't see very many street poets or street fortune tellers walking around where he's from in Texas. So he's immediately, a cynical American about it and not just letting the night progress. And so there's times where you want to like rib him and say, man, enjoy this moment with, you're kind of making an ass out of yourself. But at the same time, it feels very natural. And I'm glad that that's in there, because if he was devoid of all that, you'd almost think like, oh, were they trying to make him not so American to fit this movie that's not taking place in America?
When I first rewatched this, I immediately was very put off by the character of Jesse and was very taken with the character of Celine, because Jesse does come off as kind of like macho a little bit, and that guy would not make me get off a train with him, or I would not want to get off a train with that guy. But in subsequent rewatches, I found that it was maybe more like he was just immature and insecure, really. It wasn't that he really had that. He had a little bit of bravado, but it was all kind of fake a little bit. And maybe I'm off base on that, but in seeing his transition over the next, 18 years, that's how he looks to me now. And he looks so young compared to like who he is later, even though he is kind of the same exact person in Before Midnight as he is in Before Sunrise. But I'm getting ahead of myself.
The way he is in Before Sunrise, there's a 10-year gap between these two movies. And when we revisit him, it's believable to me that he would have become a writer, even though he has this immaturity in the first film. He is interested in the arts. He's interested in studying people and like experiences. He doesn't want to just stay in one place and be comfortable. He likes to challenge himself. And so it does feel like there's a natural progression of like, oh, this guy would have written a book and he would have really thought about this experience, this deep moment that he had with Celine, and put it on paper, and then would be doing a book reading somewhere in another country. And to me, it's like a good way to transition a sequel with characters that no one had really thought about. We're going to do something with this very low budget movie that made like $15 million at the box office. It cost like $4 million to make. It seems like an unlikely sequel and a very unlikely trilogy for how much they go together so cohesively. Yeah. Let's take a quick break there. Let's go to another clip of Jesse and Celine hanging out in Before Sunrise. We'll be back.
I've been wondering lately. Do you know anyone who's in a happy relationship?
Yeah, sure. I know happy couples. But I think they lie to each other.
Yeah. People can live their life as a lie. My grandmother, she was married to this man, and I always thought she had a very simple, uncomplicated love life. But she just confessed to me that she spent her whole life dreaming about another man she was always in love with. She just accepted her fate. It's so sad. And in the same time, I love the idea that she had all those emotions and feelings I never thought she would have had.
I guarantee you it was better that way. If she'd ever got to know him, I'm sure he would have disappointed her eventually.
How do you know? You don't know them.
Yeah, I know. But it's just people have these romantic projections they put on everything, that's not based in any kind of reality.
Romantic projections?
Yeah.
Oh, Mr. Romantic up there in the Ferris wheel. Oh, kiss me, the sunset. Oh, it's so beautiful.
All right. Hey, tell me about your grandmother. What were you saying about her?
No.
So Linklater and Kim Krizan had worked out a template for the script of what would become Before Sunrise. From the get-go, Linklater had always been upfront with Krizan, saying that he wanted to involve whoever the two leads were for this film in the writing, because it was going to be such an intimate story. And in order to believe a movie that's about the ethereal notion of making a human connection with someone, you had to buy it. The actors had to sell it, so their words needed to be formed from their own minds. So he wanted the actors involved. Krizan and Linklater worked together, kind of coming up with this template for just shy of 2 weeks, and eventually came out with what would be around like 35 pages of a script. Linklater didn't really have a setting for this because he also didn't have anyone buying it, nor did he have a budget for it. But he thought I could always rely on the San Antonio train station. He knew that really well. If he couldn't get funding, it was close to home and it would save money. So if all else fails and he wasn't ever able to sell this, he knew he could go there. So same year, that he and Krizan are writing this, Dazed and Confused comes out, and he is promoting the film at the Vienna Film Festival. And it was there when he and who would become the Before Sunrise executive producer, John Sloss, they discovered that there were European subsidies to be had if one were to film abroad. So he kept this in the back of his head. And at the same time, at the Vienna Film Festival, he came across Castle Rock Entertainment co-founder Martin Schaefer, and he read the script for Before Sunrise and thought it was a whole different take on not necessarily a rom-com, but a romantic film, and thought that this was totally Castle Rock material, and they wanted to go ahead and greenlight this project to move forward. They were also very interested in shooting abroad and using those European subsidies. So with Castle Rock's funding and being able to shoot an American movie overseas, this was going to not necessarily make it for on the cheap, but would definitely take down the budget a little bit. And going back to that notion that Linklater had of when you are an American traveling abroad, you're much more likely to kind of throw caution to the wind. So now we've got pretty much a script-ish, but Linklater knows he wants to involve the cast, so we've got a company behind us to put this movie out, and we've got a template for a script. It's time to move forward with casting. That would be about a 6 to 9 month process. That would be a bi-coastal search for who would be the leads. And I think originally the characters were named Terry and Chris. They really didn't have a gender of either one because that's how loose this was. It wasn't necessarily aimless, but Linklater wanted to keep things open. But he didn't know if it was going to be a European male and an American female or vice versa, like what it ended up being in Before Sunrise. So eventually, after this multi-month search, it was whittled down to Ethan Hawke, Julie Delpy, Michael Vertan, who gosh, he's in like every rom-com, but Never Been Kissed is probably what he's most noticeable from. And Sadie Frost, who's plays, who is it? Is her name Lisa, I think, in Bram Stoker's Dracula? She's the one who gets real vamped out in the white dress. Anyway, so it was down to those kind of 4 actors. Delpy had the French accent working for her. She was also a very seasoned performer, very professional, had been around in the European market since she was a kid, but not necessarily in the American market. And at this time, Ethan Hawke was like, he was blowing up. He was little Mr. Stud Muffin, indie, I remember my cousins, Chrissy and Amy, like thought that he was the biggest heartthrob in the world. And he was, come on.
Yeah. Post Dead Poet Society, he really had a break there. He was doing, making some weird choices. I think he did like that really bad mystery date movie. And then he
I remember that.
was in Alive. So he was doing some big budget Hollywood movies, but not really the lead. Or if he was the lead, the movies weren't as well made. And so he also seemed like he was someone that was like very into theater, balancing his time between being in plays and then also acting in movies.
And that's actually how Ethan Hawke got this role, was Anthony Rapp, who he's really well known now, but I guess most known from Dazed and Confused or Adventures in Babysitting or Rent. But Anthony Rapp was in a play with Ethan Hawke and invited Linklater to see the play. And Rapp had also invited the cast of the play to see a secret screening of Dazed. Ethan Hawke saw that, totally fell in love with it. And he and Linklater struck up a conversation. How could you not? You've got indie director of the time and Mr. Hotshot indie movie star. Of course, they're going to strike up a conversation. And they ended up hanging out until like 4 a.m. talking. And Linklater eventually sent Ethan the script. And Ethan thought that he was offering him the role. And of course, he's like, well, yeah, why wouldn't I do this? But Linklater was not offering him the role. He was offering him the opportunity to read for the role, which, admirable. Linklater's not going to be, hey man, you might be hot, but still want you to read for it. Because the important thing about this film was you needed to have chemistry with your co-star. And that co-star, Julie Delpy, she was one of the very first to audition at the LA auditions. And she admitted, the more interviews I see with Delpy, like she is so funny and so charming, and the things that come out of her mouth always surprise me, including admitting that she was drunk during her first audition for this and didn't think that she was necessarily going to get a callback, but she did, was not drunk for her callback. Linklater was impressed with her extensive resume already. She'd worked all over Europe and immediately went to the top of Linklater's list. He thought she was just perfect for the role. So when it came down to the 4 people that were at the top, Hawk and Delpy read together, and their chemistry was instantaneous at that point, and it kind of wasn't a question after that of who he was going to go with. Now, the added pressure here was these actors were going to, this was not only an acting job, this was also going to be a writing job. Justin, you mentioned Dead Poets Society for Ethan Hawke, and the director of that, Peter Weir, had given the actors an opportunity to write dialogue a little bit for their characters in that film, and Hawke already had writing experience, and the idea of writing more for this role and really being, involved in creating your character spoke to him. Delpy was intimidated kind of by the whole idea of Hollywood a little bit, but thought it was such a fresh notion to be allowed to write for her character that was really exciting. But it was also terrifying, I think, for everyone involved. But the excitement over being in control of your character outweighed anything that was too overly scary.
And since it is us, I will bring up Bill Murray for just a moment.
Oh, yeah.
In that, many times you've talked about how Bill Murray has agreed to do a movie and then gotten the script and it's half made and they just sort of expect him to make it better. And so that's the immediate scenario that went through my head is like, these actors are like, what? You want us to like finish your script for you?
Yeah.
But this situation seems so much more different because they wanted to get the chemistry right. It wasn't about just an actor coming in and adding jokes or like adding situations. This was more about what would you guys say in this situation? How would you react? And the more that Linklater questioned them about certain scenarios, the more they were able to open up and say, wait a minute, I don't know that she would do this. I don't know that he would agree to that, or I don't know that he would get defensive about that. And knowing that these 2 actors have to really convince an audience that they've met for the first time. And it's a very fine line to walk because I've seen movies like this time and time again where it's all in one night, usually takes place in New York, and everything feels wildly scripted. And it feels like these actors are very comfortable with each other. And this, trying to have actors who feel comfortable together, but also feel like this is so spontaneous. And because of the style in which this movie was made and the way that Linklater approached it with having the actors be involved, there was a lot of, not criticism, but people talking about how the latter movies seemed to be totally improvised, which wasn't the case. I mean, they kind of took what was working, how they developed this movie, and then applied that even more heavily to the next 2 films.
Yeah, definitely. I think that while Sunrise was scary for the actors initially, it became easier in some ways for Sunset and Midnight, but at the same time, the pressure was on a lot more. So it was scarier in the sense that like they needed to at least recapture the magic of the first one, but have it be something completely different. So the scariness was, even though they were familiar with each other and the writing and how they worked together, which was awesome, it was scary in a whole other way. Now, the initial writing process, Delpy, Hawke, Linklater, and Krizan met for a couple days, but it would be Linklater, Delpy, and Hawke who went to Vienna the summer of '94 and started this 3-week intensive writing workshop that would continue throughout the 25 days of filming Before Sunrise. They really had to live together and create these characters together and throw out ideas. Delpy said that how Jesse initially asks Celine to get off the train, how he did it initially. She said, there's absolutely no way I would get off the train with you asking me like that. So it was a lot of how are these people actually going to genuinely react, where it becomes something that's more than just acting. Because in a sense, you're being another person, you're faking it in some ways, but this has to be something that's unflappable, that goes beyond just playing a role. So Delpy added a lot of the female perspective, which was in addition to Krizan's. And thankfully, I think Linklater knew that he needed that because his background had been very, very male-centered stories, like no shade or anything, but he knew that he needed that female perspective. But that both Hawk and Delpy were putting a lot of their personal feelings and experiences at that time in their life into the script, along with the real story, of course, of Linklater's, and trying to fit this into Linklater's vision, which was very clear of what he wanted, and I think was a nice framework for the actors to have because they knew exactly what he wanted and they could work within the confines of that. But I can't imagine how daunting it must have been to try to recreate the most dramatic thing that had ever happened to Linklater at that point in his life, he said, and that's creating a genuine human connection, trying to make that believable, but they certainly really do pull that off on screen. And we talk so much about how Hawk and Delpy were involved in writing the script. Delpy said that the original screenplay needed a lot of, revamping. Both she and Hawk said that they felt that there wasn't a lot of romance in it, which was something that they had to really punch up, which that makes sense if you're involving the actors in the writing of their characters. Of course, they're going to be the ones that punch up the actual romance factor in it. Now, why didn't Hawk or Delpy get credit for helping co-write this film? I don't think I've heard anybody say officially why that was, but both actors said that they weren't exactly mad about it because they weren't sure if this movie was going to work anyway. So if it was a flop, cool, their names weren't on it as a writing credit. And Delpy said in an interview, too, that she felt that if their names had been on it, that the actors' names had been on it, that maybe the film wouldn't have gotten as far. Because sometimes, I have heard that before when you see that 4-6 writers are on a movie, that it can be a total disaster. So if that was the idea behind it, I get it. I am glad that as the movies went on, that certainly wasn't the case anymore.
Yeah, and I definitely think when the other two movies came out, they put that front and center, like co-writing credit by Delpy and Hawk, because they wanted to make sure there was no, I guess, confusion on their involvement in the script. And it totally makes sense with this being a romantic movie. There, in the beginning, there is a lot of walking and talking, two characters getting to know each other. But as an audience, anytime you're watching these type of movies, you're like, are these two going to get together? You know, it's like, what are we waiting for? Scene after scene, they're in a record store, they're, hanging out in the street, they're eating dinner, they're in a cafe, like, someone going to make a move. There is a little bit of anticipation there. It's like this movie is like a little bit anticlimactic at times. But then at the same time, I think about every television series I'd ever watch where they drag out a romance for like 8 seasons, where like they almost, realize that they like each other. So I think waiting like 45 minutes is not that big of a wait before, you see these characters start to fall in love with each other and want to sort of anticipating like, are we going to get physical with this and how are we going to do that? Because we're just kind of walking around the city and we don't really know where a lot of stuff is. We can't afford to grab a hotel room for an hour. But the way that the movie deals with all this, I think, is like really, again, a genuine way, and that they eventually are like, let's get a little physical and like, but let's continue on this like lovely evening at the same time.
And that did they or didn't they post-sex scene, for me, the most romantic part of the film, because everything before feels, it does feel like two people getting to know each other, but it feels like they're becoming friends, like they actually do like each other. I think about the scene, the pinball scene where they're playing pinball and they're talking about past relationships and how they interact with each other. The only level of flirtation that's in that is when Ethan Hawke says, oh yeah, my girlfriend or my ex-girlfriend, and she's like, wait, your girlfriend? You have a girlfriend? So there's those moments, but it's not until after like the post-sex where it's the most romantic, aside from the early record store scene, which like is a heart grab.
Yeah.
But the moment when they're walking through like the early morning in Vienna and they hear somebody playing an instrument and stop and look in, and Ethan Hawke says, let me take a picture of you, and he's not actually taking a picture of her, he's like taking a mental picture of her, and they do that back and forth, like, and then like just like lay there somewhere in Vienna until he has to leave for his flight, like just enjoying the time with each other because they've already gotten to know each other. They know each other. They also are feeling the weight of the time that they have thrown to the wind and haven't even been thinking about parting until it's actually upon them. And so that for me is like the most, because it's the heaviest. It's when the movie actually becomes heavy, is thinking about, well, shit, I think I have feelings for you after 12 hours. This is really weird. Not even really weird. They don't think that it's weird. It just is. And how the movie wraps up, Jesse walking Celine to the train, like, Justin, you're not a crier at movies. I'm totally a crier at movies. Man, does that one get me.
Well, and this idea of not exchanging numbers, not doing the obvious, seems a little bit odd to me at first when I was doing the rewatch. But then at the same time, they're so caught up in this moment of like, I want to spend every last second that we have, focused on this moment, not so much worrying about the future. You just want to savor the moment, and that to make a pledge basically of like, hey, let's meet back here. And then to end the movie without any sort of epilogue, we don't know. The answer is given to us a decade later, but for this movie not saying to be continued or anything, we're just left with our imagination of like, did they both, did he make the jaunt, to get there, or did, he get home and get a job and get wrapped up in life and was like, it was just a one night thing and forget about her, or, same thing with her. I love that open-endedness about it. Don't get me wrong. I don't like that about every movie, but I think it like totally works in this scenario, with characters that we've just met and just have briefly spent a little bit of time with, because we know that they're living in this moment, that they have other lives outside of this moment that they're going to have to go back to. And, reality sets in the same way of, when you're on vacation brain and then that Monday that you get back to work and it's like the night before and it's all like, comes crashing down and you're like, oh shit, I got to get up early today. And like, I've got responsibility. And I think that this movie, we see that on the outset, but they just want to have this moment together. And I love the way that this movie ends. Never did I think in my life that when a sequel was announced for this, that I was like, oh yeah, I've been waiting for a decade to find out what happened to these characters. I was like, oh yeah, Before Sunrise, that was a good movie, but then I would have never expected the amazing connection that I would have in the first 5 minutes of a movie of two characters rekindling the last 10 years of their life and like questioning each other on why they didn't keep up with each other.
That whole idea, because it is something that does seem like, why didn't you exchange addresses at least, and I mean, they say it, it's sad. I don't want to miss you. I don't want to be sad. We're going to meet back here in 6 months. So it's not even a question. That's why we're not exchanging information. But that whole notion is such a young person's idea of not really taking into, even though you feel the weight of the moment and you feel like you never want to leave this person's side, you're not really taking into account that those connections don't happen that often. So just go ahead and exchange numbers. Make sure that if something happens, in the future and you're not able to meet up, that at least you can contact each other. But again, young person's notion of not realizing that meeting doesn't happen very often. And as we see in Before Sunset, they revisit that idea of, why the fuck didn't we just like exchange information? Our lives would have been completely different. No,
absolutely. But I think it worked out for a really nice ending that you kind of weren't expecting. It didn't feel like a standard Hollywood type ending where he's like, wait a minute. And he's like running along the train, like, I got to give you my number.
Yeah, exactly.
And when Before Sunrise came out, it wasn't, this whole trilogy is like really well regarded now. But when Before Sunrise came out, it did decent business. It made its money back and a little bit of profit. It opened at the Sundance Film Festival, so it just gives you an idea of like, I mean, back then, like really small, low budget movies would open Sundance and then hope to get picked up. But since it already had a studio backing, it did get North American and international release, and it was critically regarded. Linklater also was lauded as a filmmaker who listens to actors and has really in touch with like what the youth are thinking, but not in such a MTV type way, and more of a philosophical way and like a natural way of how life and time works. But at the same time, it wasn't like they were lining up to have him do a big budget version of this, you know, and maybe those offers came through. I'm sure that he got offers to do like romance type movies, but he's always been a filmmaker that's like, I want to either collaborate or write what I'm going to direct. And so after Before Sunrise came out, he made another really small film that was like a Sundance movie that really I don't think anybody saw. And it's a movie that I did as one of my pick of the weeks way back in the day. And that is Suburbia, not the 80s one that people know of mostly, but Suburbia, Linklater, 1996, 97-ish. A really dark and funny movie that I think is his most like underrated gem of a film. I watch it like once a year, and I think it's a hilarious movie, even though there's a lot of darkness in that movie. And, you know, and then after that, he did try his hand in another studio movie, Newton Boys. That movie was not successful, but he teamed up again with Ethan Hawke. Then Linklater kind of goes into this like experimental stage where he's doing Waking Life and works with Ethan Hawke and Delpy again, and they have a little bit of a moment in Waking Life, and then does an experimental type digital movie for like no budget called Tape, also with Ethan Hawke. And so at the time, you know, he was still working very much in like low budget movies, staying in Austin, but then he has his biggest hit in a movie that we love, that we talked about not too long ago on the podcast, School of Rock, which really makes Linklater a hot commodity, you know, in Hollywood, and then also with actors that want to work with him. Coming off of that movie, I never would have imagined that, I feel like I can kind of remember this when it was announced, because I was living in Austin at the time, and like everybody always talked about Linklater, you know, what's he doing, what he's working on. When it was announced that he was, they were going to make a sequel to Before Sunrise, it seemed like the weirdest decision, but also, you know, coming off of a smash hit like School of Rock, but also like very Linklater. Yeah, let's do this. Let's bring these characters back. But again, and I said this before, I don't think I was prepared for like how much this movie was going to impact me and how wonderful a little 80-minute revisit of these characters would be. But it was really, really, you know, surprising, I think, to a lot of people. Let's take a break. Let's go to this, just the meetup in Before Sunset, right in the beginning of the movie, right after Jesse does his he's in a bookstore and he's doing a Q&A about his book, and the book is about this night that he had with Celine, and he looks over and he sees her, and he hasn't seen her in 10 years, and immediately he's just like, you can tell like he's kind of like wrought with emotion. He's distracted. He's like still trying to answer questions in this Q&A, but what he wants to do is just like go talk to her immediately. And then they have this, one of the best, I think, like if you're going to do a sequel, this is the way to do it. This is how to reconnect characters, by having a real conversation, summing up the time that we've missed in this gap, which is a decade, which is a pretty large portion. Usually sequels are like, you know, and then 3 months later they went on this adventure. So let's take a break. We'll go to that scene. We'll come back. We'll get into Before Sunset.
Did you show up in Vienna that December?
Did you?
No, I couldn't, but did you? I need to know. It's important to me.
Why, if you didn't?
Well, did you? Oh, thank God you didn't.
Well, thank God you didn't.
God.
I mean, thank God I didn't and you didn't. I mean, if one of us had showed up there alone,
I know.
then that would have sucked.
I know. I was so concerned with that. I always felt horrible about not being there, but I couldn't. You know, my grandma died a few days before, and she was buried that day, December 16th.
She
that
died,
day.
the one in Budapest?
Yes. You remember that?
Yeah, I remember everything.
Of course, it was in your book. But anyway, I was about to fly to Vienna, you know, and we heard the news about her. And of course, I had to go to the funeral with my parents.
Yeah, well, I'm sorry to hear that.
I know. But you weren't there anyway. Wait. Why weren't you there? I would have been there if I could have. I made plans and... You better have a good reason. What? Oh, no. No, you were there, weren't you? Oh, no. Oh, that's terrible. Oh, no, I'm laughing, but I don't mean it. Did you hate me? You must have hated me. Have you been hating me all this time? You have.
No.
Yes,
no,
you have.
No.
Oh, but you can't hate me now, right?
I know. I mean, I
my
don't
grandma...
hate you, all right? Come on, it's no big deal, all right? I flew all the way over there, you blew the thing off, and my life's been a big nosedive since then, but I mean, it's not a problem.
No, you can't say that.
I'm
Oh, I can't believe it. You must have been so angry with me. I'm so sorry. I really wanted to be there more than anything in the world. I swear.
Honestly,
I mean, you can't
swear.
be angry now. My grandmother. I mean,
No,
you
I
can't...
know. I honestly thought that something like that might have happened. I was definitely bummed, but mostly I was just mad we hadn't exchanged any phone numbers or any information.
I know, that was so stupid. No way to get in touch.
I know,
didn't
we had
even know
nothing
your last
to go
name.
on.
Nothing.
I know. I mean, but remember, we were both afraid that if we started writing and calling, that it would slowly, fade out.
Yeah, it definitely wasn't a slow fade.
No, it sure wasn't.
I know, we wanted to pick it up where we left off.
Which would have been fun if it
So it was Linklater's Waking Life in 2001 that sparked the interest within Delpy, Hawk, and Linklater to, hey, these characters are still with us. They're still familiar and the story's not done. So that little snippet of Jesse and Celine in Waking Life is what sparked this new interest in and Before Sunset. It doesn't mean that they weren't scared to revisit this entire film and see where it goes, but the characters were still there and they wanted to do it. This would also be this trio of writers like to say the lowest grossing indie movie to spawn a sequel. They weren't sure, are they the only people that are going to care about this sequel, or are people going to go see it? But it's what needed to happen for them. Delpy was actually fired by her agent for even getting involved with this project. She says that, her agent was like, this is a waste of your time. You don't need to be doing this. I've got you an audition for Rush Hour 3. That's what you need to be doing. And they parted ways on that. Sunset came at a time in Hawk's life where he was going through marriage troubles with Uma Thurman, and he said that doing this movie saved his life. It came at a time where he needed to revisit these characters. With Linklater, he knew that there needed to be some things that were a little different about this. He wanted this movie to be in real time, still have that walking, talking, same sense of Before Sunrise, that the story would take place in Paris, but they wouldn't be shooting the sights of the city. It would just be the background. Same thing as what they did in Vienna. I haven't really heard Linklater say this, but it's pretty obvious. When he came out with Before Sunrise, there was a sense and hope of wanting to reconnect with Amy, the real life woman in his life, that inspired this entire story. So beginning the movie with basically how he started Before Sunrise, with the Jesse character writing a book about his time meeting Celine, this is how he thought that this made sense to start the film. He also knew that there was no way he could control anyone's level of interest in this film, but these three were dead set on doing this. Kim Krizan was involved for a little while. All four were sending ideas back and forth to each other. They were trying to develop an idea for a larger budgeted sequel, but they couldn't find the funding for it. So Krizan kind of, I wouldn't say she wasn't involved in the writing process anymore, but she kind of wasn't. These were, her characters that she helped create, but it did just kind of boil down to Linklater, Delpy, and Hawk. They reworked some ideas that were unused from the Sunrise script and tried to rework that into Before Sunset. They started emailing and faxing each other ideas. Basically, Delpy and Hawk would send Linklater monologues and dialogue, and he would edit them together, try to form some type of cohesive script, and then they would get together in one room and make this kind of all come together. At some point, I think like 2003, this was, a hodgepodge of a script in a sense that all three of them had different screenplays or pieces of, and that's what Before Sunset ended up being, was everything that they just kind of put together, and Linklater took out the pieces that weren't going to work. Sunset was filmed over 15 days. There is a lot of walking and talking in this, but I think that it adds to the overall speed of the film. It is a quick 80 minutes, and that Steadicam usage that's all throughout the film is, it's just like kind of nonstop. And the movie's also shot in sequence. Not that that necessarily matters, because it's not like Linklater just used 80 minutes of film, obviously, but I think shooting this movie in sequence had to help in keeping up the momentum of this film. You've got 80 minutes to reconnect 9 years of your life together and cram in as much as possible. There were some difficulties. It was really hot at this time in Paris, and also with a movie that's called Before Sunset, this is going to be an issue when you're trying to match the color of the sky, time of day. That's going to be much more of a problem than Before Sunrise, when you just need to shoot at night. But overall, this film was delivered on time, within budget, and pretty much, I think, came out to be... I kind of go back and forth on what's my favorite of the series. And right now, Before Sunset. Yesterday, it was Before Midnight. Before Sunset. That's what I'm going to say now.
Same for me. This is my favorite of the trilogy, really by a large margin. And what I love about this movie so much is that even though we get all the answers to our questions from the first movie in the first 5 minutes of this film, Linklater and Delpy and Hawk, with the script and the characters, don't choose to just end it right there. You know, they don't do this quick little catch-up scene and then, now this is the new adventure of Celine and Jesse. They keep coming back to that moment because it's a hot issue for them. They want to talk like normal people. Oh, here's what we're doing now, but they keep coming back to that moment, that night. You know, it was so incredible. It's what I've been thinking about for 10 years. You know, he's like, I wrote an entire book about it. So I love that the movie keeps going back to that. And I also love that this film gets the audience excited about the idea that, hey, all your dreams have been answered. You've all been waiting for this moment, you know, that they'll rekindle. You found each other. He wrote this book. He was kind of probably hoping that you'd come to this bookstore, and you did, and everything worked. And then we get the sucker punch that both of them are in relationships. He's married with a kid. She's in a pretty serious relationship. I love this slow unwind of, oh, okay, they're married. Oh, wait a minute. They're in relationships that they don't like. Now we're going into an even more intense moment in this movie. And this, again, it's 80 minutes long. They're in the car and he's revealing that he's not happy with his marriage. She's revealing that now that they've rekindled this moment, it's like shaking her up so much. She's like ready to leave him, just leave this cab. And it gets so intense. And I love that everything stays in the moment. This is one of those movies that truly feels like we're in real time. The movie keeps the actors moving. You know, they're walking, they go into a cafe, they get on a boat, but they're in the cab. So the camera stays stationary on them, even though we're getting movement from transportation, but it doesn't feel so deliberate that it feels forced. Like, oh, let's get them in a cab so we can change up the situation. You kind of ignore the background. I love that they, you know, we're like, let's not show the sights of Paris. This isn't about a romantic movie in Paris. This is about two characters that are in different points in their life. And for the last 10 years, they've romanticized for this moment. And now they're face to face. And there's a lot to unpack. And they unpack the entire thing over the course of 80 minutes to where I feel like fully satisfied with this short of a film, you know, not to get crazy about it, but I honestly feel like this is one of the better sequels that's been created as far as like continuing on a story of two characters that we care about. But then once we learn more about them, the idea of this third film becomes so enticing because, guys, you have another chance now. I mean, you've been so honest with each other and where you're at in your other lives. Are you willing to push everything aside to like live, you know, continue on together and not let another 10 years of the rest of your lives go by and wondering, what if we exchanged information this time and kept up with each other?
Yeah, right? That question is one of the first things that Jesse says. How would our lives be different? How we just exchanged information? Why didn't we do that? And Sunset continues on with the same kind of themes of being in the moment, of fate and chance and missed connections. But Sunset is, in that respect, so much more of a sucker punch because we feel like these people are the exact same people they were when they met. They're just older with different life experiences, but have been so profoundly affected by their interactions with each other that in some ways they haven't been able to move forward in a lot of ways, because while they have been trying to do that, they've never really let go of what happened between them. And you know, it is a romantic notion to think that you can be that affected by someone, but I mean, they sell it really well, and I believe it. The spontaneity of this movie feels much more alive than I think the rest of the series. Not that, I mean, the rest of the series definitely feels very up and like it's happening in real time, but this one's just kind of like a different pace, I would say. When the film switches from us reconnecting with Jesse and Celine and them getting past like where they are in their lives, I think it's a good 40 minutes in before we learn that they're both in relationships. And isn't that a coincidence that neither one of them divulged that information until way further in the film? Like after they have both, I think even Jesse's made reference to, oh, I wish we could just get out of here and have sex. Or he says something like kind of jokingly. She says something like that. Like they're both flirting back and forth. And then it's way later that they both say, oh yeah, I'm in a relationship. And it's even just a little past that when Celine finally gets to her breaking point of, you know what? I liked your book and everything, but like it really fucked me up. And I feel like I haven't been able to move past where I am. I think that the story arc in this is very unexpected in the sense that Sunrise is very much a build-up, and then, you know, it kind of never goes down. Like even when they part, you part, it's still an up moment. This one is like, we're great, we're good. Oh, shit. They have both been so profoundly affected by each other and not seeing each other. Why didn't they exchange information? And then once we get past that, we come back up because now they have the opportunity to, where Jesse had to leave in the end of Before Sunrise, he has the option to just not get on that flight.
And I do really appreciate the way we get to that point in this movie, because there's certainly the style of the second film is similar to the first one, but we don't have a bunch of like winks and throwbacks and all that kind of stuff that sequels always tend to do.
Sure.
But when it gets toward the end of the film where something seems familiar, it's like we know that just as well as the characters know that their time is limited and it's going to come to a close. And now they're faced with a similar situation they were in the first film. And once again, I love that we're not at some airport where she's watching him take off in a plane. He goes to her apartment. She's like, dude, you're like really going to be cutting it close here. Like, you know, don't you need to like call the driver and get all your stuff arranged? And he's like, no, it's okay. And then it's open-ended, but we get the sense of like, you know, she's like, you're going to miss your plane. He's like, yeah, no. And what a way to really suggest a big decision by two characters and then just cutting to black.
I think it's through Celine's way of, I think she says at least 3 or 4 times, you're going to miss your plane. You've got to go. You got to, don't you have to leave? 3 or 4 times she says that. It's on her last one, when the movie closes, it's like, and right there, that is why I'm in love with these two characters, because the 3 or 4 times that she says it before, it's like, oh no, you gotta go. And then the last one's like, she knows he's not leaving, and he knows that she knows.
You're reminded often in this film why you love these characters too, because they are characters that, because of the situation and the scenario that they're in, they're living moment to moment. And so it makes sense for Celine to like flare up in the cab and be crying and upset and almost want to exit the cab, and then an hour later be lip syncing and talking about going to a performance and dancing in front of Jesse. Again, living in the moment. These characters they understand as well as we do. Like we, the audience, are in tune with their feelings of you got to live it up. You may not see this person again, and you've had all these feelings built up. And there's so much about these movies that are relatable, I think, in relationships, and it's handled really, really well. I think the third film delves into more of the darker side of adult relationships and living with each other for a long amount of time and becoming older. And this movie handles this moment of like, we're out of our 20s. We're starting to identify who we are as a person, but we're missing this certain element, this certain person that we connect with. And so, immediately when you have that, you start to think about, in my life, what have I done? Who have I met? Who are the people that influence me? Who are my heroes? And to have that sitting right in front of you, it's a big moment. It's a big time to take a chance. And so this movie gives an answer to that sort of, again, leaving it open-ended, but giving us just so much room for a third film to enter into this series, which again seems unlikely, but having seen all three of these, especially one after another over the course of a few days, it's wild to me how they were filmed 10 years apart, because they just fit so well together and the characters seem so seamless.
It also feels like Sunset is more of Celine's movie to me than Jesse's. That's not saying it's not equal. It's definitely equal parts, but it feels like her role is much more prominent. I think after Sunrise, Julie Delpy was getting a lot of offers for roles for women who were the, kind of girl on the pedestal sort of thing. And in some ways she is, but in Sunset, while she is that, definitely that Jesse's been putting on a pedestal, she is definitely way more centered in herself and very she's made a way for her life, and has the opportunity to offer up more interesting information about who she is. And it almost seems like she's matured more than maybe Jesse has, but fundamentally still the same people. And that's one question that this trilogy has all throughout is, are we the same person that we've always been since the beginning? Also, from a writing standpoint, I think Before Sunset has the most amount of quotable lines. There's one that's memory's a wonderful thing if you don't have to deal with the past. And I could go on. I wish I could deliver that monologue that Delpy does in the car, where she just kind of goes off on Jesse for how this book, how someone writing a book about you and their memory of you, and you not really having any control over that, and also not having had contact with that person, how it's just a immobilizing and like very, very frustrating feeling. Her monologue is like one of my favorite things about the film.
I totally agree. Yeah, that and the meetup for me are just excellent scenes.
I also gotta love that Julie Delpy has 4 songs in this film, most prominently the one that she sings to Jesse in the climax of the film, which is like, what a moment. There's everything about that is such a beautiful moment that it's like brings you to your knees a little bit, but has a gorgeous voice. I love that you can hear sprinkles of the other songs in the movie. I think the movie opens with one of her songs too. On top of being the lead actor, writing the script, you also have songs in the film.
Yeah, and that is a very, such a tricky thing to do. Like when you have someone who's like nervous about performing something like as a character in the movie, and then the fact that it's, her song, her singing, and that they play the entirety of the song. I mean, she performs to Jesse, but like it's so intimate that the most voyeuristic scene of the movie is like her opening up and like, the suggestion that the song was written about him and her inserting his name. And though he makes a joke about it that's really funny, like, I bet you just changed the name. It shows how quickly each of them can be vulnerable with each other, even though they, combined have known each other less than 48 hours.
Yeah.
It's just a very unique way to do a scene, and I appreciate the fact that it lets it play out. This movie's 80 minutes long, but because of scenes like that, you feel like you've seen more than you actually have because of the intimacy of the characters and what we're getting to see them, how we're getting to see them interact with each other and share with each other.
And they never kiss in this movie, do they?
They don't.
I love that.
Yeah. Well, when this movie came out, it did about the same amount of business as the first film, but it was very critically acclaimed. A lot of people, like myself, were shocked at how amazing a sequel could be to a very low-budget movie from the mid-'90s. And so Linklater had already kind of, at this time, he was doing more, I would say, like bigger budgeted movies or like Hollywood type films, still with his own little spin, but he, not a director for hire, but definitely like not as small as these movies are. But still kind of, it seemed like he was balancing his time between working on this, working on other bigger films. Also, around this time is when he had the notion to do the movie Boyhood, which, if you haven't seen, is basically even a more meditative movie on aging. And it's, he follows this kid who wasn't really like an actor. Ethan Hawke's in it as well, and Patricia Arquette. It's a fantastic movie, but if you dig the Before trilogy, Boyhood is a little bit different. It's more of like a coming of age tale told in a way of like how the Before trilogy is in that style. And so, he kept meeting up with the actors and they would do a scene and then they would wait a few years. And so you see this kid essentially grow up on screen over the course of like 2 hours and 45 minutes. It's a long movie, but it's really worth it. And so, Linklater continued his journey with like playing with time and how that takes a toll on relationships. And so once we get to this third film, Before Midnight, these characters have been through a lot, and we kind of see it's sometimes a rocky road in relationships, and that wasn't really hinted at in the other films. But this film, the third film, and it needed to go somewhere different. It really needed to delve into something, I think, a little bit more along the lines of like, let's get some plot, let's get some, what are these characters, where have they been, are they living together, what's going on? And man, we really get like a mouthful of like how they feel about each other and how maybe they've grown apart. But let's take a break. We'll go to a clip from Before Midnight, and then we'll get into that to round out this Before trilogy.
Look at us. Here we are. We are in, the Garden of Eden, and we can't stop fighting.
I don't think there's one natural human state. The human state is multiple. I mean, if that's what you see when you're watching the girls play, that means you're depressed.
Okay. Maybe I am.
No, but when I see them fight, I see beautiful energy of going forward in life and not letting anyone step on them or take away what they want. I like it when they fight. It gives me hope for them.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's because you see anger as a positive emotion, and you only end up hurting yourself, your work, the kids, me.
And you never get angry?
When I do, I don't see it as a positive.
You know something? The way you write in your books, people come up to me and think I make love to some wildcat Henry Miller type. Ha! You like to have sex the exact same way. Every time.
When you got it, you got it.
Kissy, kissy. Titty, titty. Pussy.
I'm a man of simple pleasures.
Yeah, very simple. And I've been meaning to tell you that lately. You know Henry Miller on any level. And you know what? This room gives me the creeps. I was expecting something quaint like the real Greece.
This place is
What
pretty
the hell
real.
are we doing here anyway? This is all too planned, like we're supposed to have this great evening. There's no room for spontaneity. It is all gone from our lives. All right, and this is stupid, and it's not working.
Okay, well,
right?
obviously.
Yeah. And,
right.
and I curse Ariadne and that perv Stefanos for doing this. Okay, a couple's massage. What the fuck is that? That sounds sleazy to me, right?
You don't have to do it, okay? Come on, this place isn't so bad. I like hotel rooms. I think they're sexy.
Yeah, I know you do.
Now, getting to the third film in this trilogy, the first movie, the way I felt about it was like, oh, this is really nice. It's just like this nice moment with these two people. It's romantically charged. The second film kind of blew me away with just how genuine and heartfelt it was, but like, still had this vibe of the first movie where it's like romantic, but these characters are dealing with real emotions and real problems in their life. Then we get to this third film where you're just like, Richard Linklater, you son of a bitch. You're like, why are you making me like be self-reflective about my life? And like the questions that and emotions that come out in this movie. This was the movie I think that like sparked us having just like kind of heart to heart off mic conversations about life and where we're at, and it's very this movie hits you in the gut. I mean, several times, especially if you've been in a relationship for a long time or been married for a long time, and if you have kids and those kids are you have different ideals about how to raise kids and different ideals about where you want to live, and it's very unique in a sense that this movie tackles these issues head on so delicately at times, but at the same time so in your face, to where it's kind of unlikable at times. Like I feel like there's a real shift in these movies where in the first film Jesse's kind of bombastic and annoying and cocky, and then in the middle movie we we kind of have a sympathy for both of these characters and a love for both these characters. And in this one, the approach is like Jesse's the more level-headed one, and Celine goes off half-cocked and gets, I wouldn't say she's unlikable, but like she's like more on the attack, in their discussions about their relationship and potentially getting a divorce. This movie's totally different in the sense that we're not solely with Jesse and Celine the entire film. The characters are separated from times. The movie opens with Ethan Hawke and his son from his previous marriage. And then we are reunited with Celine and Jesse, and they're spending time in Greece. They've been there the entire summer, and there's been a fork in the road. They have twins that are like 8 or 9, but they've grown apart. We don't get that sense in the beginning of the film. The beginning of the film, we just get the idea that like these guys have been together for 9 years now. All of that post-Vienna romance has kind of maybe dwindled out a little bit because they're dealing with the day-to-day of like taking the kids to school and, cleaning up after each other and going their separate ways in their careers. But once we get to the heart of the movie of like the fork in the road of their relationship, I think the movie switches gears and it becomes the darkest one in the trilogy, but at the same time, the most real and I think the most relatable in terms of like how we as humans struggle and work hard in relationships and marriage.
Yeah, for me, Midnight is, like I said before, I vacillate between this one and Sunset if it's my favorite. I think Sunset is the most enjoyable watch for me. Midnight is the one that really hits home and I relate the most to. I mean, not that I have kids or am in a 9-year relationship, but the from beginning to end, their story and experience is something that to one degree or another I am familiar with. And so when we get to this breakdown of, I don't want to say breakdown, but the conflict in their marriage, it is something that's like, if you've ever experienced it, it's really something that you're going to feel, like you said, come on, Linklater, you really got to make me face reality here. But Midnight also deals with all of the same things that the previous movies did as well. How does time change us? Does it change us? Are we the same people that we were in Sunrise? How have our decisions before affected us now? Like, okay, Jesse and Celine are together now, and Jesse and Celine wouldn't be together if Jesse hadn't cheated on his wife. Now Jesse has a complicated relationship with his ex-wife because he handled that breakup poorly, and she hates Celine. It's all of these decisions and the idea of fate and chance and everything that's led us to the point that we are. Midnight overall is the one that deals the most with aging and the idea like memory and how we deal with the past. And how it affects our present. I don't want to put a certain darkness on this movie. I still think that this movie is intimate, incredibly intimate, intelligent, honest, very naturalistic. It shows that these two still have this long-standing relationship and connection. And, I mean, they're still flirting. I think Jesse, he could probably serve to keep growing or keep maturing a little bit more. He still is that immature American guy, and I think that that's frustrating for Celine, who feels that her husband isn't really seeing all of the sacrifices that she's made for their marriage. But it does really turn the mirror around on us and shows us how relationships can have communication breakdowns, and the idea of compromise is a really big theme throughout this film. But that's not to say that the underlying feeling of love and romance, being in a relationship with someone, this isn't about a couple that's breaking up. It's about a couple that's going through it and needed a chance to actually communicate with each other and actually talk about things, and probably something that they don't really have a lot of time for. And Justin, you mentioned the lunch scene before where we actually see Jesse and Celine with other people. We never see them previously in the other films with other people. And I know you said off the mic that this scene kind of stands out for you, and I agree. It stands out because we never see them with other people. I do like it in a sense because it does kind of recenter us around that notion of aging and memory and connection with another person, where we're discussing how relationships can be fleeting, how they change over time, or what's important in life, your relationship, your romantic relationship, your friends, or your work. What's your priority? While Sunrise and Sunset, much more on the Sunrise end, have all of these ideas, these philosophies and bigger worldly conversations, Midnight stays focused in the sense of really honing in on the relationship between two people. I like that about this film, even though it is much darker and frustrating than the previous two.
To me, this movie stands out in the sense that the first two films are essentially movies that are taking place in the present. The first movie, it's taking place solely in the present. And then the second film, it's a movie about being in the present, but romanticizing the past. And the third film is about self-reflection. It's like they don't want to live in the moment because they realize that the moment is rough, but there's all this self-reflection on why is the present not good, and we want to get back to this, we can't go back to like this moment that we had built up so much in our head, and now they get to be together, and it's again it goes back to the age-old grass is always greener. Once they got together and lived for a while, it's like, oh, is this any different than any other relationship I could have been in? Was this really the one person in the universe that was like my soulmate? Could have been another person that I could even been happier with. And so, and those ideas are explored in this movie, where the movie really kicks in for me, because in the beginning when they're arguing and you're complaining and, oh, life is tough, you're able to vacation in Greece for 3 months. Seems like a pretty pleasant, relaxing, people are just sitting around eating Greek food and talking about music and literature and their lives. You're like, okay, get over yourselves. But then we get into the real meat of their relationship and how they feel about each other. And it's really cutting. I think other movies have tried to approach this, and what you end up getting is like the Oscar reel scene where the characters, like, they're shouting at each other and this is like their acting moment. And man, this movie doesn't feel like that at all. I mean, we have those scenes in this film, but they feel like really raw, and then they settle. And very much like I think how real life works to me is that the scene doesn't end with someone smashing something against the wall or like, well, you know what, maybe I don't love you anymore, and they walk out, and then we cut to the next day. They argue, and then it calms down for a minute, the way real arguments happen. They're more mature, and they're aware of their issues. They're aware of their problems. They're blowing off steam, and we're getting, again, like this voyeuristic view of them blowing off steam with each other and them sort of self-projecting. But then they talk about some real issues, and I think real issues that are totally relatable to relationships, especially with kids, and like wanting to, he wants to move to Chicago to be closer to his son. She could potentially start a new career where they're, in Paris, and he's wants to live in America, and there's so much friction going on in this movie.
Here's the shit about that, though, is that Jesse wasn't man enough to say that. She had to drag it out of him. And
I agree.
And that's where I feel frustrated for Celine. And I'll say this, even though I probably in reality am more like Jesse's character than I am Celine, I completely understand what Celine, where her frustration is coming from, and why she kind of goes off, because she's trying to get the truth out of him and he's giving it like piecemeal or just kind of pansy.
Yeah.
And you're like, I understand. And this has all probably been bubbling up for her. I do admire Jesse's way of trying to keep it even and trying to keep it level-headed. But at the same time, when your partner's mad, you doing that and you seeming superior is not going to quell the situation.
I agree. And and earlier I said...
Are we fighting right now?
Well, no, but earlier I did say that her character was a little unlikable. Maybe that was like harsh, because I think what I'm getting from her character is like, she's a realist. Jesse still wants to be, he wants to hang on to the fantasy. He wants to hang on to that moment where she is a very pragmatic person, lives a much more normal life than he does, like he's writes, and then he goes off and does like book tours and all that kind of stuff, where she is probably working more closer to a 9-to-5 regular person job, and then also trying to manage the children. So, that she's more tense. So maybe that's where the word I was looking for, not unlikable, but she comes off as much more tense in this film than Jesse's character. Also, too, I think we see his character annoyingly is like sex is on his mind about every hour still. And so his first thing about if they're fighting, it's just like, oh, well, how about if we just have sex? And the sensation from that will wash away this argument, where she's like, that's, not going to work.
Happen.
Yeah, you brought this up and now we're talking about it. Let's finish this conversation. And he doesn't want to finish the conversation. He wants to talk about it a little bit, but then play games. And I think we see toward the end of the movie that it's his go-to. That's his self-defense mechanism. And she's not really having it. But then we see her like get a little more gentle, and it's like, I'll give you this if this is the end. I don't want to be so harsh about it. And it's a very bizarre way to end the movie. It's my least favorite of how these 3 movies end, but I still like the approach in that they're essentially playing out the fake version, the unreal version of their characters, and not Jesse and Celine present day, because they were like, if we let go of that, then we're, what are we? We're just arguing in the hotel room and want to get a divorce.
Another very relatable theme that I think has been all throughout the series, but we see how it changes for two people who meet this progression of a relationship, is insecurity. And I think in the beginning, there's a lot of confidence, a lot of kind of, a little bit of blustering. In the second one, we have, do I look the same as I did 9 years ago? Oh, what? You thought I was fat then? And, Jesse's doing the same thing. Like the insecurity there, it's a little bit more playful, but it's still real, and it's still something that people deal with no matter what stage of your relationship. But in Midnight, the insecurity, I'm very, very thankful that it is shown that it's not just Celine, that it's also Jesse too, which I think in most films, insecurity is always going to be put off on the female character, and her insecurities have kind of always been the same, that he's a philanderer, he's been cheating on her, and she's probably right. His insecurity is over the relationship that she has with his son, that might be a little bit closer than what he has with his own kid. I think that that's very telling of the minds that were involved in creating the script. That Linklater, Delpy, and Hawk all brought what had been happening in their lives to this, more so than probably ever in everything from the previous films. As much as we talk about how this film is difficult at times, not difficult to watch, but just difficult in that it really just smacks you in the face as far as difficulties of relationships, it was also a much more self-conscious film and divergence in tone from Sunrise and Sunset. But it was also a really stressful, kind of not fun experience to crank out this story. It's not that it sounds like they didn't want to be doing it. It's just that Delpy, Hawk, and Linklater knew that they couldn't keep romanticizing the past, that this is reality, and that all of these times that we have been putting off reality, that we've been putting off real time, we're in real time now. And it's harder. It's harder than living in fantasy world and dwelling in nostalgia and romanticizing what we once were. It was, I think, a 10-week process of creating this script. It was first started out with like 4 weeks of creating an outline, throwing ideas around, and realizing that they needed to make this a much more grounded experience, but also something that was going to captivate audiences. They knew that this was going to be more emotional and have a lot more psychological aspect to it. They banged out about a 10-page outline, and then for the next 3 weeks continued to write this script. But like the previous 2 films, they were also writing while filming. There was a lot more pressure to this film too, because they knew that they had a deadline, they had to get it done, and because this one wasn't as enjoyable of an experience, we'll say. It presented a welcomed challenge, but it wasn't exactly easy. Linklater definitely succeeded in keeping the story simple and straightforward, but even though it's a harder movie to watch, I like that it ended up here because it does feel like we needed to get to a reality point of Jesse and Celine. And that closing scene that you brought up just in the finale of after Celine says, you know what, I don't think I love you anymore, and leaves. And by the way, when she walks out of the hotel room, comes back in, walks out, comes back in and walks out, that's real. People do that. I've been the Ethan Hawke in that situation, and that there's so much truth that happens in that fight scene that it's really hard to watch sometimes. But when Jesse goes to Celine and she's saying, didn't you hear what I said? You're not listening to me. This isn't a joke. I'm being serious. His way of trying to get her to rethink things is the same Jesse as we saw in Sunrise. We see in that moment that they still are the same people when they initially met. It's just they've gone through many years of life changes and experiences. And I think when we get to that climax scene, it can leave you with either a glimmer of hope if you've experienced something like this and say your relationship ended. You could see Jesse and Celine and think maybe they're going to come out on top and they're going to be okay after this. And it could leave you with a sense of longing, regret, seeing how things could have been done differently in your life. But watching how it starts out with Celine immediately rebuffing him and him still keeping, not pushing her, but still trying and trying and trying. We have again that small climb down and up again, the roller coaster that's with us throughout this entire trilogy. We have that in that climax scene. And when Celine gives in a little bit, that I think is your glimmer of hope. And depending on how you feel about relationships and how you feel about Jesse and Celine, I leave Before Midnight thinking that they're going to stay together.
Yeah, that's kind of like what my inclination is that they realize that this is a rough patch and that they got heated in an argument, and things, do become exaggerated in an argument. You're grasping at things immediately to throw at somebody, and they're not always airtight or logical and totally factual. And so, I think that we see a little bit of that represented in their arguments, but then, this idea that she will play along with his bit that he's doing. At first she, it's just like, come on, this is annoying. And it actually,
she's serious.
He comes off a little, it's pretty like annoying. You're like, God, this is almost like humiliating. But then when she starts playing into it, he's putting in a little effort. So I'll play along. I know that'll make him happy. And like, it immediately calms the situation. You see that she knows how to fix him to get him to like relax and stop freaking out versus saying like, all right, well, let's get a divorce, which is kind of what you at first, like I was kind of expecting of this conversation to be like, how are we going to proceed with a divorce? Like that's how I thought that it would end. And it totally caught me off guard. And the second time watching it, I appreciated it much, much more. This movie moves a lot slower and the scenes are a lot longer. So there is more time to realize, to kind of think to yourself, because this movie is like makes you kind of think a lot about your own life. So you can kind of drift into your own thoughts at times because they are long scenes in this. But then once we get to the end, and the second time I watched it, when I kind of know what to expect, I was able to settle in with those like arguments and even the lunch scene, settle in and just relax with these characters. Like you're hanging out with these characters for essentially an hour and 40 minutes or however how long this movie is.
I think that that's what this movie is. There's only one walking and talking scene, and sunrise and sunset, that's all they were. We are with these characters during, I think it's 5 or 6 scene setups, and only one where they're walking and talking together, which is probably the happiest moment that they share together, but also employs many of the same things that we see before. Flirtation, insecurity, their obvious connection that they have with each other, and years now of knowing each other better than anyone else knows the other one. I like that this is the completion of the story. I hope that there's not another one. If there is, I want it to be something totally different. I don't know what that would be, but I like how this wraps up, and I like too how we do end on a question mark. We don't know if they're still together, and it depends on how you feel about relationships. But that's how Sunset and Sunrise ended, was on this idea of hope. So if we think that the third one ends the same way as the other ones, then we have a happier ending.
And I do think too, it's like, end on this note, because the ideals I think are so big in your 20s, 30s, and 40s are so different. You know, in your 20s, it's like totally full of like hope and dreams and like anything could happen. Your 30s, you're self-identifying, trying to figure out who you are. And this movie, I think, does a good job of like, you've come far enough in life to get a little bit cynical, and you start thinking about the things that you know that you want that you can't have, and then the things that you really don't like.
Yeah.
And those you magnify on those.
Yeah.
And I mean, not always, but I think that's very relatable in life. This movie does a good job of showing those segments of time in our lives, and like going beyond that, I think there's less of change between our 40s and 50s and 60s. You know, I mean, I'm certainly you're starting to think about how you want to finish your life off, which is, I think that might be too dark of a movie to handle. It's just like, it's like no one wants to hear like a conversation about how they're determining what age they should take out their retirement and guess when they're going to die so that they can, have enough money to stick around an extra 10 years. That doesn't sound like a very fun film.
No one wants that. Audiences were there for this movie. People wanted to see what Jesse and Celine, where they were at this point in life. Like the previous films, it more than doubled its budget. It premiered in January of 2013 at Sundance, and then went into wide release in June of the same year. Like Before Sunset, it was nominated for Best Adapted Screenplay. I think very, very well deserved for both films. And like Sunset and Sunrise, got a lot of high praise and accolades, widespread acclaim in general. And I feel like it really is the best bookend to this journey of Jesse and Celine. And even though it wasn't really planned that these films would be 9 years apart, like it just happened that's what happened with Before Sunset. And then they were planning a sequel that was to become Before Midnight. And originally it was going to come out 10 years afterwards, but people were able to adjust their schedules to make it 9 years after. We've already now missed that 9-year mark thanks to COVID. So I feel like maybe that's a sign that there shouldn't be a fourth one. And if there is, it needs to be way further down the line. Not that I don't want to see Jesse and Celine. I just want them to be together. As someone who failed in my own personal Before Trilogy real life experience, I really hope that Jesse and Celine stay together and are together until the day they die.
Yeah, I agree. And I didn't have any final thoughts on this movie, but I kind of wanted to end on a recommendation. And that's if you really enjoyed the Before Trilogy and you liked Linklater's Boyhood, you might be familiar with the series. If you haven't, if you aren't, the 7 Up series, it's a British production. It's a documentary series, a social experiment, and they picked these different kids, different facets of life, different classes, and it starts when they're 7 years old, and the filmmakers would revisit these kids every 7 years, and they would reflect on what's happened in the last 7 years. And they're already up to 63 up, so every 7 years a new version came out. And so I always wonder if that's what sparked Linklater's interest in this. And if you haven't seen this series, it's incredible. It's absolutely incredible. Like, it's kind of mind-blowing that the honesty that they're able to capture in these subjects that they've been following for years now. It's pretty wild to watch. So if that's something, if you liked the style of these movies in Boyhood, I wanted to recommend the 7 Up series to listeners out there.
I feel really dumb that I've never heard of that. That's awesome, though.
Well, I'll loan it to you. I have it on DVD.
I would definitely love that. I had one final thought, and it seemed appropriate to save it until the end, because it's not exactly the happiest thing. And again, another reason that we want Jesse and Celine to stay together was that we talked about her in the beginning, Amy, who was the original inspiration for Richard Linklater to write Before Sunrise. As it happens, in 2009, a friend of Amy's contacted Richard Linklater. I think this person worked at the toy store with Amy and said that he'd seen Before Sunrise and thought, this is somewhat of a familiar story, and I wonder if you're this guy. He said that actually that Amy had died in a motorcycle accident it was like Mother's Day of 1994, which meant that she never got to see Before Sunrise. That's a rough one.
It was nice that they did a dedication.
It seems like the final kind of perfect bookend to be able to dedicate Before Midnight to her.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
Well, let's stop there. Thank you so much for listening to somewhat of a different episode for us. It was a little more free form.
Yeah.
I kind of enjoyed it, though. It was nice we didn't really share our thoughts on the movie with each other as much as we normally do, because we wanted to kind of go in this in a much more spontaneous way. And
I'm glad we did that.
Yeah, I am too. And so next month, we're going back to our regular schedule of we're going to release an episode a month. Next month, we're delving into one of my favorite and most exciting moments of film, at least in my life personally, and that's the indie boom of the 90s. And we've been talking about doing a Parker Posey episode forever, and so we're finally going to do it. Party Girl is going to be our main film that we're going to be talking about, but we'll be talking about Parker Posey's career, and our picks of the week will be Parker Posey related. So you have that to look forward to. Again, I don't care what Larry David says. Happy New Year again, everybody, and we'll see you next month. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening, and thanks for kicking off the new year with us, guys.